Everyone, listen, we're going to do a couple things tonight. I'm glad you're here. You're going to have a really special service tonight. First of all, what we're going to do is we're going to give you some in the news. How many are ready for that? Amen. Tell you what's happening in our world. I guess it was last week. Is that right? How many do we have listening to in the news? Just on over 6,000 just on Facebook. So a lot of people are listening to in the news. They are interested in what's going on, obviously. And so we want to make sure we fulfill that. And then we're going to do a special Christmas service tonight. And I'm glad you're here because we're going to give you a test. Oh, you're really excited about that, aren't you? All right, let me give you the first thing in the news. Here we go. A federal judge has ruled the Affordable Care Act unconstitutional. How many have heard this? So it's a big deal. Let me tell you what's happening. On the Friday, a federal judge fulfilled a wish conservatives have held for more than 8 years by ruling the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, unconstitutional. U.S. District Court Judge Reed O'Connor agreed with a group of 20 states and Republican governors or legislatures that argue that constitutionality of the law's individual mandate dissolved when Congress removed the tax penalty for the uninsured. So the tax penalty really was the thing that the federal government had, federal courts had backed. They had said because it's a tax penalty. Well, now that that's gone, Obamacare, the entire thing's in question. Let me read it. In 2012, the Supreme Court upheld the law and its mandate requiring people purchase insurance on the grounds that it fell within congressional taxation power. By the way, that was a big to do also because the government really can't sell, it can't force you to buy something. Yet they put it underneath the tax plan so the government can tax you. So actually, Obamacare, the premium was a tax for us, or for those people who had it. O'Connor said when the tax penalty was removed, and it was, so was the central argument upholding the 2010's law's constitutionality. His ruling declared not only the individual mandate, but the entire law unconstitutional. That decision leaves Republican and Democratic lawmakers, as well as millions of Americans wondering, so what happens now? For the immediate future, the answer is nothing. The ACA, Obamacare Act, will remain in place while the law's future is handled in the courts, a process that could take months or years to resolve. People who brought coverage on the health care exchange before Saturday's deadline will be insured for 2019. So it's pretty sticky, and it's going to continue to be sticky. You know, one of the things that we should have done, I say we, the Republicans should have done this, they should have come up with another plan. The problem is they said something's wrong, and it was, but they didn't come up with another plan. That's your non-functioning Congress. Because we have a non-functioning Congress. Let me give a little bit more that goes on. That's Obamacare. This one is kind of interesting, especially with Christmas rolling around. Fight against Big Brother surveillance toys gets serious. There is a stream of new regulations to protect children from internet-connected smart toys, such as dolls and games that enable the manufacturers to listen to their playtime. So these dolls that are interactive have microphones in them. They also have speakers in them, and they take anything your child's saying or anybody's saying to them, and it can go back to a main database. Now the effort is going global. The Electronic Privacy Information Center is urging the European Commission to ensure that children will not be exposed to surveillance while playing, so it can also look at your children. Just think about that. Think about child pornography and think about those toys in a child's room. Connected toys expose children to greater harms than non-connected toys, covered under the Commission's directive. The European Commission should revise the EU Toy Directive to regulate connected toys and establish mandatory safety standards to address the unique safety and security hazards they pose, said the letter signed by EPIC President Mark Rottenberg and others. There should be a smart regulation for smart toys. Here's what's happening. What's happening is our technology is advancing faster than we can put laws out to protect ourselves on it. Not just smart toys, but anything. Whether it's your apps on your iPhone, or whether it's Facebook or anything, all of that is advancing far greater than any of the laws we're putting, and no wonder why, because our Congress is stuck. They won't pass laws on anything. And so what we're doing is we're really susceptible to privacy concerns and a lot of things because we are not passing laws to help ourselves protect ourselves from these things. Let me give you another thing as we're going on. The Chinese obviously are communistic. It's a communistic nation, 1 billion people strong, 1.2 billion people strong. They are atheistic. Communism and atheism is synonymous. And they hate Christmas. Chinese city bans Christmas celebrations to maintain civility. The Chinese city of Langfang near Beijing banned any public displays celebrating Christmas, including Christmas trees, lights, banners, and any religious activities in public in an attempt to win a Communist Party's award for being civilized. The Chinese Communist Party has spent years attempting to dissuade the population from engaging in Christmas festivities, even more secular ones like displaying Christmas trees and exchanging gifts. The Communist Youth League has taken a particularly strident stance on Christmas, calling it China's Day of Shame. In propaganda messages last year and filling campuses with banners urging young Chinese people not to participate in the celebrations. The Global Times, a state newspaper, announced the decision of the Langfang government as an attempt to maintain a clean environment. I don't know how you get rid of Christmas and make it clean, suggesting that celebrating Christmas makes the city unclean. The newspaper noted that businesses and residences face government retribution if they put up posters, banners, or light boxes about Christmas sales. The city has banned Christmas trees in any form and warned that police will work extra hours on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day to keep street vendors from selling Christmas merchandise. So I guess Hallmark movies are out too there, I'm sure. Let me give you a little bit more. This is Australia. This is kind of interesting under Israel, and it's pretty amazing because Australia has been a holdout. We have talked about Jerusalem being the capital of Israel, and several other nations have come on, but not real big nations. Smaller nations that get retribution from America obviously have come on, but some of the bigger nations have not. Australia is a big nation. After reversing decades of Middle East policy, Australia will now wait to move its embassy to Jerusalem. Last year, the U.S. unilaterally recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital, triggering violent unrest in the region. Prime Minister Scott Morrison of Australia said on Saturday that his government now recognizes Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, upending decades of Australian foreign policy in the Middle East. Australia now recognizes Jerusalem being the seat of the Knesset and many of the institutions of government is the capital of Israel, Morrison told an audience at the private Sydney Institute think tank. Morrison said his government would move his country's embassy when practical and supportive and after final status determination. In October, the premier had floated the idea, saying he would consider whether to follow U.S. President Donald Trump's decision. Now they have followed it, a big country to follow that decision. So that's pretty neat. Let me give you another thing in Israel. Israel is technologically advanced, it's medically advanced, it has a superior armed forces, and now they have something that they've come up with that no other nation has. And by the way, they have many of these. They have an automatic rifle that shoots around corners. No one else has that. This one is one they just developed. Israel developing missiles no other country has. Netanyahu says state-owned defense contractor working on weapon systems able to reach anywhere in the area hails IAI, it's the company, contributions to first Israeli lunar mission. So not only are they going to develop this bomb that they have, and by the way, this is a pinpoint bomb. This bomb can go somewhere in the neighborhood of about 500 miles and strike within a foot. And so no one else can do that. It's a pinpoint bomb. And they're also going to be sending a man to the moon. And so the only other nation that has sent a man to the moon is United States, unless you're listening on the internet and you don't believe we went to the moon, which I'm really not sure you can even think that, but lots of people do, and I'm sure we'll get a whole lot of people saying something about that. But they are also developing this bomb. So Israel is very well prepared. They are doing something to really kind of protect themselves in this turbulent time. Let me give you another thing and go to war and tell you a little bit about that. So we see things heating up in the Middle East, and actually Turkey is the Middle East. It's also very prophetic. It's not only in part of the Gog-Magog war, it's part of Ezekiel 39, it's part of Psalm war. So here's what's happening in Turkey. Islamic beast. Turkey wants global Islamic union governed by Sharia. So they're talking about a caliphate. Turkey appears to be accelerating its endeavor to establish an Ottoman-style Islamic government encompassing several Muslim nations. Now, a caliphate is to have one person, the caliph, over all of the Muslim nations. The last one they had the Umayyad Caliphate, which is in the 600s. They have the Abbasid Caliphate, which was in the 900s. They had the Ottoman Turks, which is right before World War I. And World War I, the success of World War I, and we'll read this when we get to Psalms a couple weeks from now, ended the Ottoman Empire, which ended the last caliphate. Well, we know that they're trying to build another caliphate, and now Turkey is initiating it. One such effort was apparent at the Second International Islamic Union Congress in Istanbul. The self-described aim of the Congress is to make determinations on an academic and political ground with regards to current problems in world politics, particularly in Islamic world geography, and to offer solutions to decision makers. Now listen to these statistics. At the event, prominent supporters of Erdogan, he's the Prime Minister of Turkey, prompted the creation of a common Muslim economic market, like a common market for Europe. Participants declared the aim to create an Islamic, quote, superpower of the future on Islamic lands owned by 60 Islamic countries. They want to unite 60 Islamic countries, inhabited by 1.6 billion Muslims on 19 million square kilometers, constituting 55.5% of world oil reserves, 45.6% of its production, 64.1% of natural gas reserves, and 33% of its production. So what they're saying is they want to starve off the rest of the world. And again, I hate to reiterate it, but I've told you over and over again that Islam is a civilization takeover. And so if they unite under Sharia law and one union under a caliphate, they can cripple the world. And they're very close to doing it. Turkish Deputy Finance Minister Nurieta Nabati suggested in his address to the conference that Erdogan, to whom he referred to as the leading imam to the Ummah, which is the Islamic nation, would preside over this planned Islamic confederation. Man, that would be horrible. Is there anyone whose power would be enough to defeat the one who relies on Allah, he asks. The declaration reads this in part: Islamic countries have to unite under one common will, and the Islamic country's parliament, which will conduct permanent activities, has to be established urgently. The Confederation aimed to include 61 Islamic countries in the unity of Islam, provided they decide in free will and accept the unity terms and conditions. So another thing brewing, another thing afoot in the Middle East. Let me give you this one also as we go on. I don't have a picture for it, but this is the one for the Islamic one. Let me give you this one. No separation of Satan and state. Satanic Christmas displays aren't progress. What would the founding fathers have said about satanic displays at Christmas time on government property? And by the way, they would have been totally opposed to them. Our founding fathers were Christian. They had a Judeo-Christian mindset. They were not universalists. They were not someone who said you can bring any religion into America. They just weren't. Read their quotes. Read their definitions. Read the things that they have said, and the quotations about how we need to stay a Christian nation, how our laws are founded from the Bible. And so they're not saying, and the fact about separation of church and state wasn't ever in the Constitution. It was a letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote to someone, and it was taken out of context. Now listen to this, what's happening in America. Would they have insisted their First Amendment mandates allowing such, or that something has gone terribly wrong with the American experiment? The land of Lincoln is now more like the land of Satan, because in the Illinois Capitol Rotunda, we now find a nativity scene for Christmas, a menorah for Hanukkah, and alongside these displays, an arm holding an apple with a snake coiled around it. It reports American thinker Jeffrey Lubick. This snake sculpture is a gift from the Chicago branch of the Satanic Temple, called Snaketivity. The work also has a sign that reads, "Knowledge is the greatest gift." If this was brought in during our founding fathers' times, they would never have allowed it. This is not First Amendment rights. That has been abused over and over again. It certainly is a great one, but it's also quite lacking in those supposing that the First Amendment's Establishment Clause mandates such a revolting travesty, as Lubick puts it. He asks rhetorically, if a group of people incorporates as a non-for-profit religious organization to worship Medusa with her head covered with snakes, would those people be allowed to have a sculpture of Medusa in the Illinois Capitol? Good question. Sadly, and shockingly to many, recent history indicates the answer is yes. Just consider, for example, that in the central rotunda of Florida's Capitol building, these are state buildings, an atheist group hung a winter solstice banner celebrating the Bill of Rights and freedom from religion, and also inspired another atheist who built a Festivus pole made of beer cans, and the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster, this is getting absolutely ridiculous, added a small pile of holy noodles to the Capitol's hall. So you can go there and you can see a pile of noodles that's a religious symbol. Moreover, a pentagram reading, "May the children hail Satan," was erected in Boca Raton's Sanborn Square last Christmas and still stands. So it's totally out of sync. It's totally a mess, and we're watching it over and over again. Let me give you this one under religion. Progressive Christianity. You've heard me talk about it. Here's another article. If the Christian Bible isn't true, Christian morality is not good, and the Christian God doesn't exist, why be a Christian? Certain beliefs ought to disqualify a person for certain jobs. The title of this, by the way, is Progressive Christian Welcomes the Atheist Pastor. For example, a vegetarian probably shouldn't be the lead chef at a steakhouse. How many agree? A pacifist wouldn't make a good general. And an atheist shouldn't be a pastor. At least that's what you would think. A liberal denomination in the true north is giving that last bizarre scenario a go. The leadership of the United Church of Canada has settled a year-long controversy by voting to allow Reverend Greta Vosper, a self-proclaimed atheist, to keep her post as lead minister at West Hill United Church in Toronto. Canada's messed up. In her sermons and in her book, With or Without God, Vosper has made it clear she doesn't see the Bible as an authoritative word of God. She views God as not a personal being, but as a metaphor of love, compassion, and beauty. Each Sunday, members of West Hill United Church replace prayer with community sharing time, and then sing hymns that have been rewritten to accommodate secular sensibilities. The head of Reverend Vesper's denomination says he's happy with the decision to keep her, preferring to emphasize inclusiveness over the most basic belief of the Christian faith, namely, that God exists. In another recent story from the world of progressive Christianity, Reverend Nadia Boltz-Weber, a self-named pastrix in the liberal evangelical Lutheran Church of America, downplayed the immorality of pornography. In a recent hard-to-follow interview with a New Jersey LGBT publication, she seemed to be arguing that viewing pornography is mostly fine as long as it's ethically sourced, whatever that means. According to Boltz-Weber, there are issues of justice and exploitation within the porn industry that could make it immoral, but she denies that the consumption of pornography itself is a cause for shame. People have viewed erotic imagery since we could scratch it on the inside of caves, she said. And then she concludes that people who denounce porn are wrong, and they probably look at it also. The interview was part of a promotion campaign for her upcoming book on sex. And as part of the campaign, she's encouraging young women to mail her their purity rings so she can melt them down and forge them into a giant statue of the female body part. Can you say golden calf? Listen, progressive Christianity, represented mostly in mainline Protestant denominations, nearly all of which are in membership freefall, has become almost impossible to parody. The faith they're teaching is not Christianity at all. It's a completely different religion, a social reform agenda fueled by feelings. I've been telling you this. You cannot live your Christianity by feelings. They will always mess you up. Informed by secular thought while barely draped with religious language. In his book, Christianity and Liberalism, Macon contrasted liberalism with real Christianity, which began with an announcement, a revelation about the supernatural life, death, and resurrection of Christ, and the implications of this good news for our lives. The faith once delivered to the saints makes demands on us, he says. It has the power and the right to change us. How many of you are changed by Christianity and our world? It challenges our deeply held beliefs. It rewrites our deepest concepts of who we are and what's true. It demands our lives change, be remade after the life of our Savior, and redefined by the crucifixion and the resurrection of Christ. If your God, however, he says, however you define him, her, it, or they, never demands change, then your God is you. And he's absolutely right. This is what progressive Christianity has largely become. And listen, if God's desires are indistinguishable from our own, and his commands identical with the progressive social agenda, to the extent that you don't even have to believe in him to pastor a church, then we might as well stay home on Sundays and listen to NPR. Thank God, though, Christianity is worth believing. Somebody say amen. Thank God it is true that it does make demands on our lives, and it offers a salvation better than any that our culture mistakenly will ever call progress. But you are living in it. You are living in an age of progress, Christian progression, progressive Christianity. It is based on feelings. And whenever you have a religion or Christianity based on feelings, you are going to go down the wrong path. And America, unfortunately, is going down the wrong path. Let me give you a little bit of an example of that under moral decay. This is happening more and more. This is drag queen story time spreads to daycares. Back in July, this article writer says, I wrote about the phenomenon of drag queen story time at public libraries across North America, and they have been going to public libraries, where drag queens are brought in to read stories to groups of small children. In response, bloggers at the Huffington Post, Gay Star News, and Blog TO wrote columns calling me an intolerant, which is at this point so boring it hardly bears mentioning. One of the key points I was making, a point which was ignored, is that increasingly LGBT activists are being invited to children's spaces to introduce children to the ideology. It isn't just public libraries and public school systems either. As it turns out, drag queens are also showing up at daycare centers to read stories at the invitation of daycare providers, and apparently with the permission of parents. The CBC sent a journalist over to the Montreal daycare, Canada again, to deliver a glowing report of the proceedings. When Barbada, that's who you're looking at in the screen, who is more than 6 feet tall without her heels on, arrived at Over the Rainbow Daycare in NDG this week. The children were fascinated by her appearance. The Montreal drag queen brought her big pink hair, big earrings, colorful dress, and warm smile to the daycare for its very first drag queen story time earlier this week. I don't know about you, but how many are pretty sick of this? I'm pretty sick of it. I don't really care what anybody thinks out there that they think I'm intolerant. I'm really sick of this stuff, especially when it comes to our kids. Barbada, who has been doing story events for young children at the Grande Bibliothèque for about a year, read the children's stories in French and English. including Coat of Many Colors by Dolly Parton, about a girl who is poor and gets teased about her coat. After story time, Barbada and the children discuss the message in their stories, not judging people based on their clothing or their appearance, and the importance of showing each other respect. Obviously, this isn't for the kids. This is to push their agenda. When daycare owner Wendy Geitav spotted the video online of a drag queen in the United States reading a story to young children, when I showed you, she immediately imagined creating a similar experience for children at her daycare. And so she did. The negative comments were few but forceful, and Geitav said they just strengthened her resolve to move forward. That's rebellion. First, she consulted all the parents of the children in her daycare, and there were no objections, which tells me that's a pretty secular area. She said, in fact, it was a parent who put her in touch with Barbada. At the same time, a staff member posted a video of Barbada on social media, and within minutes, a parent from a different daycare responded, wanting to know how to organize a drag queen story time. You want to know what my opinion is on this? I don't give my opinion often. But I'm going to give you my opinion. You can do whatever you want to do in America. You can do whatever you want to do in North America. If you want to have drag queens come and teach your kids, you can do that. But there's a scripture verse that's really amazing. You reap what you sow. And sooner or later, they're going to realize this liberal agenda and exposing our kids to this is going to reap some massive consequences. And now, again, I'm all for freedom of choice. Choose whatever you want. You could choose whatever president you want, but then you're going to have to live with them. You can choose whatever Congress you want. You're going to have to live with them. You can choose any social agenda you want, but you're going to have to live with that. I am afraid for America down the line because we are choosing a lot of stuff, and listen, it's going to come back. All right, let me give you a little bit more under moral decay, not like you need it anymore. Germany approves third gender. Germany's parliament has voted to recognize a third gender for government documents. So now you can sign either male, female, or diverse. How many diverse people do we have here tonight? It's kind of strange, is it not? That you don't want to be, you have chromosomes. Those chromosomes decide who you are. XY, XX, they decide who you are. You can choose any name. You could call yourself a goat. You're still a human. And you still have a sex. So I just don't get it. All right, let me give you this one. And by the way, this isn't being told to anybody. Nobody's saying anything like this, especially not from churches, because it's too hot of a potato. I don't care how hot the potato is, it's wrong. Here, this one's interesting. Planned Parenthood admits unborn babies in sex ed. Now, they never call an unborn a baby. They always call it a fetus, except in this video that they've promoted for Planned Parenthood. A baby grows in a parent's belly. It seems that even abortion conglomerate Planned Parenthood agrees with pro-lifers that the little being who grows inside a woman's belly for 9 months is in fact a baby. Released this past November, an animated sex ed video from Planned Parenthood teaches parents about how to speak to their children should they ever be asked by the little tykes, where do babies come from? At no point throughout the 3-minute video does the narrator refer to the baby as a fetus. In fact, the baby is at all times referred to as a baby. And so it's kind of interesting to see that in Planned Parenthood. Now, I said something, and I want to make sure everything's on the up and up. When I quote any type of article, obviously I've done research on the article, and sometimes that research that I've done is very extensive. Sometimes it's just taken the way the article comes. So a couple weeks ago, I did an article, and I showed you a super blood red moon that's coming. How many remember this? It's coming January 21st. And I told you about a pastor who is claiming that it's the sign of Christ coming. And basically, we got inundated with people saying, you need to apologize to this pastor. He never said that. So I told him, I said, well, I took it for this article. This article is credible. And I wanted to go back and check for myself. So I did. I did some more research. So 2 weeks ago, I read an article that stated that a Christian pastor, Pastor Paul Begley, was announcing the end of the world because of the coming super blood red moon. Lots of internet context told me that he never said it was the end of the world, though the article said it did. I promised him I would do further research. I did, and indeed, he does not claim it to be the end of the world. I want that to be known. But a prophetic sign. Now, obviously, and then someone went on to tell me how wrong I am, that I don't know about signs. Obviously, that's exactly what I know about. I taught a class, and I'm going to tell them if they can listen. I taught a class on stars, and the stars are the prophetic signs of God for signs, seasons, and times. A star study class, which is on the internet. And I've been preaching and teaching in star study many, many times, and also did a Hollywood movie that I was featured in called The Sign. So I suggest that they watch that because I do say it's prophetic. My question, my concern is whenever anybody says that this is going to happen, that is really taking it too far. Now, this pastor is very prophetic as far as, he's very prophetic about the signs, and so he's warning, and I understand that. I think that's exactly what we should do. I want to be able to let people know, though, we don't know what's going to happen probably until after it happens. And so, but the prophecy is there. Signs are all over the place, which is, so I agree with him. Not that the end of the world, but yes, it's a prophetic sign. Obviously, I've been teaching that for a long, long time. And while I'm doing that, I'm going to include this in another response. Now, normally I respond to these all by myself, and I write them back. But this one I wanted to do. Somebody's been listening to my Revelation study, and there's lots of people that are listening to these studies. And so in one of the things, they gave me all these compliments about how it's phenomenal, the study is phenomenal, but they said that I had said something about the Yellowstone geyser, Old Faithful, that it's not faithful anymore. And they said, well, I want you to understand, Pastor Mark, that I've just been to Yellowstone, and it is faithful, and I want you to be able to correct that, because if you don't correct that, people think everything else you say doesn't have any credibility. So this is for that person. Thank you for watching, and I want to just read you the article. This is from the New York Times. Time trouble for geysers. It is no longer Old Faithful. A chalkboard of the visitor center announced the Old Faithful would erupt around 1:15. It was already 1:30. We only forecast, we don't schedule. Rich Hutchinson, Yellowstone National Parks research geologist, said on Wednesday afternoon. Old Faithful, the national icon of dynamism and dependability, is getting a bit irregular. Old Faithful is slowing down, said Mr. Hutchinson, which is what I said in my Revelation study, who has been studying the park's leading tourist attraction since 1970. There's good evidence that it is sensitive to earthquakes, and obviously that's why it's slowing down, or it's irregular. Oblivious to a multi-million-dollar tourist industry and relies on Old Faithful's being just that, the scientist added casually, one day it might just quit permanently. As he spoke, at 1:35, the prehistoric underground plumbing rumbled to life. Flanked by billions of steam, a hissing jet of superheated water rose 125 feet, then fell again against the backdrop of long lodgepole pines and grazing elk. But as recently as 1950, and the average interval between eruptions was 62 minutes. In 1970, when I got here, the average interval was 66 minutes, Mr. Hutchinson said. Today, it's 77 minutes. In 1970s, it was more regular. Our forecast had a margin of plus or minus 5 minutes. Now it's plus or minus 10 minutes. The change of recent years has seemed to be produced by seismic activity, most of it rarely felt on the Earth's surfaces. So earthquakes increasingly dramatically in Yellowstone last summer, said Robert B. Smith, geophysicist, professor at the University of Utah. Referring to small tremors detected by a network of sensors, he added, we had as many as 100 a day. With Old Faithful now erupting less frequently and less regularly, scientists speculate that its underground feeder system is literally losing steam. For the moment, only seasoned geyser gazers notice the difference. And that's why our reader did not notice that, because it still is faithful to some degree, but not like it was. It's losing time. Last week, it missed by 40 minutes, said David Ledden, a guide who drives in tours daily in a van on caterpillar treads. Now, normally, I don't give you those, but sometimes it's easier for me to do that than to write back. So I just want to give you that. One last one. Speaking of signs, this is coming should the Lord tarry, and I think it's really prophetic. This is a new star to appear in night sky, heralding Balaam's prophecy of Messiah. Now, listen to this very closely, because there's a lot of things happening here that have never happened before. 5 years from now, if the Lord should tarry, the light from the ancient collision of two stars will reveal a brand new star in the night sky. That's the image of it. It's a image that's projected. According to Jewish esoteric sources, this is precisely the celestial phenomenon which will accompany the arrival of Messiah. Now notice it's a Jewish source that says it this time. The new star, expected to appear in 2022, is a blaze of light called a nova. Will be the brightest heavenly body visible in the nighttime sky for 6 months. So you're going to see something in the nighttime sky that you have never seen before. As a matter of fact, no human being on planet Earth has ever seen anything like this. So it's pretty powerful. It'll be the first time in recorded history that a celestial event of this kind will be witnessed by the naked eye. Beyond its scientific uniqueness, the appearance of a new star could have, that's the optimum words, much bigger implications for the earthbound. One prominent rabbi told Breaking Israeli News, pointing to a biblical prophecy of Balaam, which hails the appearance of a new star as the precursor to Messiah. I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not nigh. There shall step forth a star out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel, and shall smite the corners of the Moab, and break down all the sons of Seth. That's Numbers chapter 24. Rabbi Yosef Berger, rabbi of King David's tomb on Mount Zion, and I know this man, cited Rabbi Moses ben Maimon, known as by the acronym Rambam, the foremost Torah authority on the 12th century, whose rulings are still used as the basis for much of Jewish law. The Rambam brings this verse about a star appearing as proof that Messiah will come one day. And he's right. Jesus said you will see his star. I mean, the star is a sign of his coming, so he's right. Again, to put a specific on it, we know this time, we know we're in the season, so you're talking 5 years. This is a pretty amazing thing. I'll tell you, especially since we get to the end of it, and I'll tell you where it's going to appear. Rabbi Bergen told the Israeli News, but he says it will come from Jacob and not from Esau, more specifically from the tribe of Judah. In other words, he's talking about the Jewish belief in it. Even more incredibly, the Zohar, the foundational work of Jewish mysticism, predicts in detail the color and type of stars which will appear. The Zohar states explicitly that the messianic process will be accompanied by several stars appearing. The Zohar goes into great depth describing how many stars and which colors they will be, Rabbi Berger explained. The new star, announced last week by Larry Molnar, a professor of astronomy at Calvin College in Michigan, will certainly be unusual. It's a binary star, so there is more than one star. Two stars orbiting a central point. Molnar described it as two peanuts sharing a single shell. In his observation, Molnar noted that the orbital period was decreasing at an accelerating rate. So these two stars, imagine the sun, imagine another sun right next to it, and imagine them starting to rotate over each other, or rotating, and imagine them getting closer and closer. Sooner or later, there's going to be a touch, and they're going to explode. Now watch. Based on the previous case of binary stars, Molnar predicted the two stars will collide in 2022, resulting in a massive explosion. And yes, this is another prophetic heavenly sign. They're coming fast and they're coming furiously. The collision will reach as much energy, listen to this, as the sun releases in its entire lifetime. Now they claim that our sun is a main sequence star. It's in the middle of its sequence. They claim it has 5 billion years of producing light and heat and energy. Mueller said in a video, when the two finally collide, it'll create a new star, a red nova. The star's brightness will increase 10,000-fold. It'll start and it'll just keep increasing, making it one of the brightest points in the heavens for 6 months, after which it will fade and remain a smaller dot in the sky. It will be the first time in the history of man that the creation of a new star will be visible to the naked eye. Ira Meshevsky, an amateur astronomer with 60 years of experience who runs stargazing tours in Misfet Ramon, by the way, it's a town perched on the huge crater in the Negev desert. It is totally black. You see every single star in the sky. Has been following the story closely. He described the delicate balance between science and faith to Breaking Israel News. Quote, the heavens, especially unique phenomenon like this nova, are manifestation of God's intellect. But this has to be understood in a specific manner in Judaism. He warned, astronomy and astrology are prominent in Jewish mysticism since God works through nature. But at the same time, the term for pagan idol worship is avodat kokim O Masalat, serving stars and signs. We don't believe in astrology or in serving them. He pointed to the Talmud and he said this, thus says Hashem, learn not the way of the nations, be not dismayed at the sign of heaven, for the nations are dismayed at them. The idolaters will be dismayed, but Israel will not be dismayed. In other words, idol worshippers will look at the heavens and wonder, but you should know that God's doing something there. According to Hasidic philosophy, the wellsprings of knowledge will be opened up in the times of Messiah. Bashevsky said, it is truly amazing that astronomers can predict this when just a few years ago, we wouldn't have known about this until the star suddenly appeared. Science has enabled us to share in God's natural process. Now here's the interesting part. For stargazers, the nova will be visible as part of the constellation Cygnus. And if you've been through my star study, you'll know what Cygnus was. It's also called the Northern Cross. So the star will appear here in the Northern Cross. A cross in the sky has been there for thousands of years. And there's going to be a bright star that's going to blow up, and it's going to be there. Now, I don't want to sizzle your brain, but you're going to see it should you live to 2022 and Jesus tarries. But it actually blew up 1,800 years ago. Because light travels. How long did it take you to get to church today? It took you probably, if you're pretty close, it took you 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Because you traveled at 40, 50 miles an hour. Or some of you that went 90 on interstate got here faster. Light also travels. Light travels at 186,000 miles per second. So we know, for example, that our sun is 93 million miles away. I'm going to do this as simple as I can. So when you see a setting sun, and how many of you have ever seen the sunset? It actually set 8 minutes before you saw it. It took 8 minutes for the light of the sun to travel 93 million miles at 186,000 miles. How many of you get that? Well, this star blew up 1,800 years ago. Its light will finally hit us in 2022. So, are there signs out there in the heavens? You bet. Are we close? You bet. So, that's in the news for tonight. I'm going to ask the ushers to come forward.